In this section, we will learn how the insecure OpenID Connect configuration can be abused. Since OpenID Connect is very similar to OAuth 2.0 in terms of how clients interact with the identity provider, many of these attacks also apply to OAuth 2.0. Before an application can start using an identity provider's OpenID Connect tokens, the client that wants to authenticate users and the identity provider needs to establish trust first. In order for the identity provider to trust a client, the identity provider often requires the client to register itself on the identity provider. The identity provider would then generate an ID for the client known as client ID, and the identity provider would also generate a secret for the client known as client secret. The identity provider also needs to know where to send the token to, so the client needs to provide a return URL for the identity provider, where the identity provider will send an ID_token after authenticating a user. Many identity providers support the dynamic registration of clients using a /registration endpoint and also GUI-based client registrations. During the process of registering an app, the identity provider particularly takes in many parameters about the app itself. Some of these parameters are vulnerable to server-side request forgery attacks. Logo_URI is a URI that the identity server will use to fetch a logo provided by the client. An attacker can abuse the logo_URI to make a call to a malicious URL through the identity server. Request_URI is a parameter that a client can register to enable pushed authentication and authorization requests. An attacker can abuse the request_URI to include a malicious URL that the identity server will happily call. Target 1 and Target 2 would assume that it was the identity server that made a request to them instead of recognizing the attacker behind the scenes. After registrations, there can be lapses in validating JWT tokens that an attacker can abuse. We will discuss them in the next section. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. We will move on to the next lecture.